This 4-year-old beggar girl is pulled by the arm until it hurts, but a billionaire saw it and did something that shocked everyone. Watch until the end, you won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The midday sun beat down on the hot asphalt of Willow Creek, a small town in upstate New York, when Maisie extended her trembling little hand to yet another person hurrying. Through the automatic doors of the local supermarket, the 4-year-old girl, with tangled auburn hair and dirty clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days, whispered an almost inaudible "please" as her big, haunted eyes searched for any sign of compassion. Franklin Thornton adjusted the knot of his Brioni tie as he exited his silver Bentley, his thoughts preoccupied with the business meeting he had just concluded. At 52, the owner of the Thornton petroleum empire had built his fortune on discipline, control, and emotional detachment. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed with the coldness of someone who had learned early on that feelings were dangerous luxuries. The shrill voice cut through the muggy air like a razor. "Get out of here, you little tramp! How many times do I have to tell you not to bother the customers?" Franklin stopped in the middle of the parking lot, his eyes turning to the scene unfolding near the entrance. A middle-aged man, his blue security guard uniform already stained with sweat, was violently gripping Maisie's arm, his thick fingers squeezing the child's delicate skin with a force that left visible purple marks. "I wasn't doing anything wrong, mister," Maisie mumbled, her words punctuated by the fear that made her small body tremble like a leaf in the wind. "Wasn't doing anything?" The security guard laughed cruelly, increasing the pressure on the girl's arm. "Begging here in front of the store is against the law, you brat. Didn't your mother teach you that a kid's place is at home?" Tears began to stream down Maisie's dirty cheeks, but she couldn't break free from the grip that seemed to tighten with each attempt to move. That's when Franklin's deep, commanding voice echoed across the parking lot. "Take your hands off her, now!" The security guard turned, annoyed by the interruption, but his expression changed instantly when he recognized who was speaking. Franklin. Thornton was known throughout the region, not only for his wealth, but for the respect his imposing presence commanded wherever he went. "Mr. Thornton, I was just—" the man stammered, but he didn't release Maisie's arm. "I said take your hands off her." Franklin's voice carried an icy authority that brooked no argument. Now, reluctantly, the security guard released Maisie, who immediately took a few steps back, rubbing her bruised arm as she watched the tall, well-dressed man who had intervened on her behalf. There was something in those dark eyes that she couldn't decipher, a mixture of controlled anger and something softer that she wasn't used to seeing in adults. "She was bothering the customers, sir." The security guard tried to justify himself, sweat now beading more intensely on his forehead. "It's my job to maintain order." "Your job," Franklin interrupted, approaching with measured steps, "is to ensure people's safety, not to mistreat children." His eyes scanned the purple marks on Maisie's arm, and something he couldn't name stirred in his chest. "What's your name?" "Gary Nielsen, sir." "Well, Gary Nielsen, you're fired. Go to HR to settle your accounts." Franklin pulled his cell phone from his pocket. "And if I hear that you've laid a hand on another child, you'll have problems far greater than unemployment." The ex-security guard opened his mouth to protest, but something in Franklin's expression made him think better of it. Muttering under his breath, he walked away towards the supermarket, leaving Franklin alone with Maisie in the hot parking lot. The girl continued to rub her arm, her big eyes fixed on the man who had defended her. It had been so long since anyone had spoken up for her that she didn't know how to react. Franklin crouched down, placing himself at her level, and noticed how she instinctively took a half-step back. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice losing its commanding hardness and taking on a gentler tone that he himself didn't recognize. Maisie shook her head, lying. Her arm hurt a lot, but she had learned that complaining about pain only brought more trouble. "No, sir." Franklin noticed how she avoided his gaze, how her shoulders remained tense even after the danger had passed. There was something about this child that awakened a fierce protectiveness that he couldn't explain, an instinct that had remained dormant during all his years of emotional isolation. "What's your name?" he asked, extending his hand slowly, taking care not to scare the girl further. "Maisie," she replied in a whisper, glancing quickly at his outstretched hand before returning her eyes to the ground. "That's a pretty name." Franklin kept his hand extended, waiting patiently. "Where are your parents, Maisie?" The question made the girl's face contort in pain, an expression that seemed too heavy for someone so small. "I don't have a mommy or a daddy anymore. They're gone." The simple words hit Franklin like a punch to the gut, awakening memories he had spent decades trying to bury. Memories of his own childhood, of an absent father, of the feeling of abandonment that had shaped his entire adult life. "And who takes care of you now?" he insisted, still with his hand outstretched. "Aunt Carol takes care of me and the other kids," Maisie replied, finally lightly touching Franklin's hand with her small, dirty fingers. "She said if I don't bring back any money today, I won't get any dinner again." The revelation made Franklin's blood run cold. Carol. He knew that name from the rumors circulating around town, stories about a woman who exploited orphaned children, using them to beg while she kept all the money they collected. "How long have you been living with this Aunt Carol?" he asked, his voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger that grew with each passing second. "Since Mommy went away," Maisie replied, and for the first time her eyes met his. "A long time. I was really little." Franklin felt something break inside his chest at the sight of the resignation in those childish eyes. Maisie had learned to accept suffering as a natural part of life, a lesson that no child should ever have to know. For a moment, he saw himself, reflected in her, the boy who had also learned too early that the world was a cruel and lonely place. "Are you hungry?" he asked, standing up slowly. Maisie nodded but quickly shook her head. "But I can't leave here. Aunt Carol said if I don't stay here begging, she'll hit me again." The casual mention of violence made Franklin clench his fists. He looked around the parking lot, at the people hurrying by, indifferent to the suffering that was happening right before their eyes. How had it come to a point where a 4-year-old child spoke of being beaten as if it were the most natural thing in the world? "Maisie," he said, crouching down again, "would you like to come with me? We'll take care of that arm of yours and then take you to a safe place." The girl studied him with an intensity that was disturbing for someone so young. "You won't hurt me?" The simple question echoed in Franklin's heart like a cry of pain. What kind of life had this child led that her first concern was whether he would hurt her? "Never," he promised. And for the first time in years, his words carried an emotional conviction that he had forgotten he possessed. "I promise I will never hurt you." Maisie hesitated for a long moment, her small eyes assessing the man before her. Then, slowly, she extended her bruised little hand towards his. When their fingers touched, Franklin felt as if something fundamental had changed irreversibly in his life, although he couldn't yet fully understand what it was. As they walked towards the car, Maisie looked back only once, at the place where she had spent so many hours begging for crumbs of compassion. She didn't know that she would never return to that hot parking lot, nor that the silent man beside her was about to discover that saving a lost child could be the key to saving himself. Franklin's mansion stood imposingly at the end of a tree-lined driveway, its modern lines contrasting with the traditional colonial architecture of Willow Creek. Maisie pressed her face against the window of the Bentley, her eyes widening at the grandeur that unfolded before her. Perfectly manicured lawns stretched in every direction, and a marble fountain sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her small voice echoing in the silence of the car. "Yes," Franklin replied, observing the girl's reaction in the rearview mirror. "It's too big for one person." Evelyn Hayes was watering the orchids on the veranda when she saw the car approaching. At 58, the housekeeper had dedicated more than 2 decades of her life to caring for the house and the solitary man who inhabited it. Her grey hair was tied in an impeccable bun, and her white apron was spotless, a reflection of the order she religiously maintained. When Franklin got out of the car and went to the passenger side, Evelyn frowned. It wasn't common to see him with company, especially on a Tuesday afternoon. Her surprise turned to shock when he opened the door and helped a small, visibly abused child out of the vehicle. "Mr. Thornton?" she called out, descending the marble steps with hurried steps. "What happened?" "Evelyn, this is Maisie," he said, placing his hand gently on the girl's back. "She'll be staying with us for a few days." The housekeeper studied the child with experienced eyes, immediately noticing the dirty clothes, the tangled hair, and above all the purple marks on her small arm. Her maternal instincts, dormant for years, awakened instantly. "My God, dear, what have they done to you?" Evelyn murmured, crouching down to get to Maisie's level. The girl recoiled instinctively, hiding behind Franklin's legs. The reaction didn't go unnoticed by him, and he felt a fierce protectiveness swell in his chest. It was as if every fearful movement from the child activated something primal and powerful within him. "She's scared," Franklin explained, his voice carrying a softness that Evelyn had never heard before. "She needs medical attention and everything else." Evelyn nodded, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. During her years taking care of the house, she had witnessed Franklin's emotional coldness, his inability to form deep human connections. Seeing this subtle change in his posture and tone of voice deeply intrigued her. "Let's go inside," she said, extending her hand to Maisie with infinite patience. "How about a nice warm bath and something yummy to eat?" Maisie looked at Franklin for approval. When he nodded encouragingly, she hesitantly took Evelyn's hand, her small fingers trembling slightly. The interior of the mansion left Maisie absolutely stunned. The entrance hall had soaring ceilings, with a crystal chandelier that reflected tiny rainbows on the white walls. Her dirty footprints marked the polished marble, something that would normally have irritated Franklin, but now he observed with an inexplicable tenderness. "I've never seen such a beautiful house," Maisie whispered, turning slowly to absorb every detail. "You can explore later," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "First, we're going to take care of you." While Evelyn took Maisie upstairs, Franklin went to his study and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Hope Villarreal answered on the second ring, her professional voice echoing through the phone. "Franklin? What a surprise! What can I do for you?" "Hope, I need your help with a delicate matter," he said, running his hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness he had abandoned years ago. "It involves a child." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Hope had known Franklin for 15 years, ever since she had become his personal lawyer, and she knew he didn't do anything on impulse. "What kind of situation?" "A 4-year-old girl, orphaned. She was being exploited and abused." Franklin sat in his leather chair, but couldn't focus on the documents scattered across his desk. "I brought her home." "Franklin," Hope's voice turned. "Serious. Do you understand the legal implications of this? You can't just bring a child into your house without following the proper procedures." "I know," he replied, frustration growing in his voice. "That's why I'm calling you. I need to know what my options are." "Well, first we need to contact social services. If the child was being abused—" "No." The word came out more forcefully than Franklin intended. "Not yet. You know the conditions of the local shelters. She's suffered enough." Hope sighed. She knew Franklin's stubbornness when he made a decision, but she also knew that behind that apparent coldness was a man with deep emotional wounds. "All right, give me a few days to research the legal options. But Franklin, you need to be realistic about this. A child is not a business project that you can control." After hanging up, Franklin remained seated in silence, reflecting on Hope's words. There was something about Maisie that awakened feelings in him that he had spent decades repressing. The girl's vulnerability mirrored his own lonely childhood, but it also awakened a protective instinct that he didn't know he possessed. Upstairs, Evelyn had prepared a warm bath for Maisie, adding bubbles and some rubber toys she had bought. Years ago, when she still dreamed of having grandchildren, the girl watched the steaming water with fascination and fear. "I haven't had a warm bath in so long," she admitted, touching the water with her fingertips. "How long?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice neutral as she helped Maisie take off her dirty clothes. "I don't know. A long time." Maisie paused, looking at her own hands. "Aunt Carol only let us have cold showers when there was water." Each revelation was like a knife to Evelyn's heart. When she finally saw Maisie's small body completely, she had to fight back tears. Besides the recent bruises, there were old scars, evidence of months or years of neglect and abuse. "My dear," she murmured, helping Maisie get into the tub, "no one's going to hurt you anymore. I promise." Maisie settled into the warm water with a sigh of contentment that broke Evelyn's heart. It was obvious that the child wasn't used to kindness or basic comfort. "Are you going to leave too?" Maisie asked suddenly, looking at Evelyn with fear-filled eyes. "Leave? Why would I leave?" "Everyone leaves," the girl replied with devastating simplicity. "Mommy and Daddy left. Mommy, Luna left. When people are nice, they always leave." Evelyn felt her heart ache. She knelt beside the tub and took one of Maisie's little hands in hers. "Listen carefully, my dear. I've lived in this house for a very long time. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Mr. Thornton." "He seems sad," observed Maisie, playing with the bubbles. "His eyes are sad, just like mine." The child's perception surprised Evelyn. It was true that Franklin carried a deep sadness, a loneliness he had cultivated as a shield against the world. But somehow, in just a few hours, Maisie had managed to see through that carefully constructed armor. "Sometimes people get sad when they're alone for too long," Evelyn explained gently. "But maybe you two can help each other be less sad." After the bath, Evelyn dressed Maisie in one of her own T-shirts, which was huge on the child, but it was clean and smelled of fabric softener. They went down to the kitchen, where Evelyn prepared a plate of chicken and rice with vegetables. Maisie ate with a desperate hunger, but also with fear, as if she expected the food to be taken away from her at any moment. Franklin appeared in the kitchen doorway and watched the scene in silence, something tightening in his chest as he saw how the girl devoured each bite. "Is it good?" he asked, approaching the table. Maisie nodded vigorously, her mouth too full to speak. Then suddenly she stopped chewing and looked at him with concern. "Can I finish it all?" The simple question hit Franklin like a punch. "Of course you can. And if you want more, you can ask." Maisie's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Aunt Carol always took the food away before we were finished. She said we were fat and greedy." Franklin sat down in the chair next to her, fighting the anger that was growing in his chest. "You're not fat or greedy. You're a child who needs to eat to grow strong and healthy." Maisie studied him for a moment, then extended her fork towards him. "Want a little? It's really good." The simple gesture of sharing, coming from a child who had clearly gone hungry, touched something deep in Franklin's soul. He accepted the bite, pretending it was delicious, as he watched the shy smile that lit up Maisie's face. That night, Evelyn prepared the guest room for Maisie, but the girl couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house made her jump, every shadow frightened her. Finally, she left the room and went downstairs silently. She found Franklin in his library, reading financial reports under the light of a lamp. He looked up when he saw her standing in the doorway, small and lost in her oversized t-shirt. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Maisie shook her head. "The bed is too soft and too quiet." Franklin closed the report and motioned for her to come closer. "What do you mean, too quiet?" At Aunt Carol's house, there was always noise. Children crying, people fighting. It's strange when it's all quiet. She approached hesitantly, and Franklin realized she was trembling. Without thinking, he pulled her onto his lap, surprising both of them with the naturalness of the gesture. "Want me to read you a story?" he offered. Maisie snuggled against his chest, finding comfort in the warmth and security that radiated from him. "I don't know how to read yet." "That's okay. I'll read to you." Franklin picked up a book of children's stories that was left over from his own childhood and began to read in a low voice. The deep, calm voice surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he had read aloud to anyone. Gradually, Maisie's breathing became slower and more regular. When Franklin looked down, she was sleeping soundly in his arms, finally at peace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel any rush to get back to work or check emails. He remained there, holding the lost child, feeling as if a piece of himself that had long been lost had begun to awaken. 3 weeks had passed since Maisie had arrived at the mansion, and a delicate routine had established itself between the 3 inhabitants of the house. The girl still woke up screaming in the early hours, terrifying nightmares that made her call for her mommy Luna between desperate sobs. Franklin always ran to her room, discovering that his presence was the only thing that could calm her down. Hope Villarreal arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and a worried expression. She found Franklin in the sunroom, watching Maisie play silently with dolls that Evelyn had bought. The girl still spoke little, preferring to communicate through subtle glances and gestures. "Franklin, we need to talk," Hope said, sitting down next to him on the wicker sofa. "I've got some information about the girl's legal situation." "And what did you find out?" he asked, without taking his eyes off Maisie, who was carefully combing the hair of a doll. "The situation is more complicated than we thought." Hope opened the briefcase and took out some papers. "Carol Baker, the woman who was exploiting her, doesn't have legal guardianship of Maisie. In fact, I couldn't find any document that proves who has legal responsibility for her." Franklin finally turned to face the lawyer. "What do you mean?" "The birth certificate I was able to obtain has inconsistent information. The mother's name is listed as Luna Santos, who passed away 2 years ago, but there's no record of who became responsible for the child after her passing. And the father? Blank field, unidentified." Hope paused, observing Franklin's reaction. "There's something else. Carol has a criminal record, petty theft, child exploitation, receiving illegal social benefits. She keeps at least 15 children in deplorable conditions." The information made Franklin clench his fists. "And the authorities don't do anything?" "It's a small town, Franklin. Carol has connections, pays bribes. The children are invisible to the system." Hope sighed. "But there's an opportunity here. If we can prove that Maisie was being abused and that there's no suitable legal guardian, you can apply for temporary custody." "Temporary? To start with, yes. Over time, if everything goes well, it could become permanent. Even—" She hesitated. "An adoption." The word hung in the air between them. Franklin watched Maisie, who had stopped playing and was humming a melody that he didn't recognize. It was the first time he had heard her sing since she had arrived. "What song is that?" he asked, approaching the girl. Maisie stopped immediately, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. "Sorry, Mr. Thornton, I won't sing any more." "Why not? It was pretty." "Aunt Carol said my voice was ugly and that it bothered everyone." The girl lowered her head, ashamed. Franklin knelt beside her, gently touching her chin to make her look at him. "Your voice is beautiful, Maisie." "Where? Did you learn that song?" "Mommy Luna taught me," she whispered. "She used to sing it to me to fall asleep." "Who was Mommy Luna?" Hope asked, approaching with curiosity. Maisie looked nervously between the two adults. "She took care of me before Aunt Carol. She was very nice. She had yellow hair like the sun and smelled like flowers." "What happened to her?" Franklin insisted, feeling a growing urgency to understand the girl's past. "She got sick, very sick. Then she took me to Aunt Carol's house and said she was going on a trip, but that she'd be back soon." Duh! Tears began to form in Maisie's eyes. But she never came back. Hope and Franklin exchanged meaningful glances. It was obvious that this Mommy Luna had been someone important in Maisie's life, possibly her real caregiver before she was abandoned with Carol. "Do you remember anything else about her?" Hope asked gently. Maisie closed her eyes, concentrating. "She lived in a pretty house with a garden. There was a big tree in the backyard where I used to play. And she always said that my real mommy was taking care of me from heaven." "Your real mommy?" "Luna. Mommy Luna said that Luna was my real mommy, but that she had to leave when I was little." Maisie opened her eyes, looking directly at Franklin. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" The innocent question broke Franklin's heart. He pulled Maisie into a tight hug, feeling how she fit perfectly against his chest. "I don't know, little one. But I know that you're safe now, and that no one's going to send you away." That afternoon, while Maisie napped in her room, Franklin and Hope met in the study to discuss the next steps. The lawyer had spread documents and photographs on the mahogany desk. "I got these images of the property where Carol keeps the children," she said, showing photos that appeared to have been taken secretly. "The conditions are even worse than we thought." The images showed a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, with children of various ages in dirty clothes, playing in a yard with no grass. Some appeared malnourished, others had visible injuries. "My God," Franklin murmured. "Maisie lived in that place for at least 8 months, according to my investigations." Hope pointed to a corner of one of the photos. "Can you see that little girl there in the back?" Franklin picked up a magnifying glass and examined the image. It was Maisie, visibly thinner and in even more tattered clothes, sitting alone, while other children played. "She always stays isolated from the others," he observed. "The younger children suffer the most. Carol uses them mainly to arouse pity in people, but also punishes them more severely when they don't manage to raise enough money." The anger grew in Franklin's chest like a storm. "How can we get the other children out of there?" "We can't do it alone. It would require a coordinated operation with the competent authorities." Hope paused. "But I can use this evidence to ensure that Carol never has access to Maisie again. Do whatever it takes." That night, Franklin couldn't concentrate on anything. He walked through the house until he found Maisie in the library, leafing through a picture book that Evelyn had left for her. The girl was sitting on the floor, completely absorbed in the colorful illustrations. "What are you looking at?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "Birdies," Maisie replied, pointing to a page with different species of birds. "I like birdies. They can fly away when they're sad." "Would you like to fly away?" Maisie looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "I used to, but not anymore." "Why?" Because now I have you and Grandma Evelyn, and you're nice to me." She hesitated, then said in a low voice, "Can I stay here forever?" The simple question hit Franklin like lightning. He had spent weeks avoiding thinking about the future, focusing only on giving Maisie the basic care she needed. But now, hearing her desperate plea for permanence, he realized that he also couldn't imagine life without her. "Would you like to stay?" "Very much," she whispered, throwing her small arms around his neck. "Can you be my daddy?" The words were like a punch to Franklin's stomach. For 52 years, he had avoided emotional responsibilities, built high walls around his heart. But this little child had managed to tear them down with just a few weeks of silent presence. "Maisie," he said, his voice choked, I've never been a father before. I don't know if I'd be good at it." "You're already good," she replied with devastating simplicity. "You don't hit me, you let me eat. And when I have nightmares, you come to give me hugs." Franklin held her tighter, feeling tears he hadn't shed in decades burning his eyes. "If you want to stay, I'll do everything to make it happen, I promise." "You really promise?" "I promise." Maisie pulled away to look into his eyes, checking if he was telling the truth. Satisfied with what she saw, she smiled, the first genuine smile that Franklin had seen since he had met her. "So now you're my daddy, Franklin," she declared, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. At that moment, watching this child who had survived so much suffering still managed to trust and love, Franklin understood that his life had changed irreversibly. He was no longer just a lonely businessman. He was Maisie's protector, and he would do anything to ensure that she never knew pain or abandonment again. But the next morning, when Evelyn went downstairs to prepare breakfast, she found the front door ajar, and Maisie had disappeared. Her screams of panic echoed through the mansion, waking Franklin, who ran downstairs, his heart pounding erratically. "She's nowhere in the house," Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face. "I looked in every room, in the garden, in the garage." Franklin felt the world spinning around him. Maisie had trusted him, had called him Dad, and now she had disappeared, under his protection. As he raced to the phone to call Hope, a terrible question hammered in his mind. Had Carol found out where Maisie was and come to get her? And if so, what would she do with a child who had escaped her exploitation? The sound of the phone ringing echoed through the silent house, but all Franklin could think about was the promise he had made the night before, a promise that now seemed to be slipping through his fingers like sand. Franklin's despair grew with each minute that passed without news of Maisie. He had mobilized all his contacts. Gas station employees were scouring the streets of the town, and Hope had discreetly alerted some acquaintances in the local police. When the phone finally rang 2 hours after the disappearance, his hands were shaking as he answered. "Franklin?" The voice on the other end was deep, familiar, but unexpected. "It's me, Randolph." Franklin almost dropped the phone. His younger brother, Randolph Campbell, hadn't spoken to him in 15 years, since the devastating fight that had destroyed any bond between them after their parents' passing. "Randolph, how did you get this number? And why are you calling now?" "I'm here in Willow Creek, and I have something that belongs to you." There was a loaded pause. A little girl who was crying alone in the town square, saying she wanted to go back to Daddy Franklin's house. The relief was so intense that Franklin needed to lean on the table. "Is she okay? Where are you?" "We're at Marta's diner, near the church. And yes, she's fine, just scared." Randolph's voice carried an emotion that Franklin couldn't decipher. "Franklin, we need to talk. There are things you need to know about this child." "What do you mean?" "Not over the phone. Come pick up the girl and we'll talk." Marta's diner was almost empty when Franklin arrived, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the scare. He found Randolph sitting at a table in the back, with Maisie beside him eating a donut with both small hands. At 48, his brother looked older than he should, with premature grey hair and worry lines around his eyes. "Daddy Franklin!" Maisie shouted when she saw him, running into his arms. "I got lost. I wanted to see the birdies in the garden really early, but then I didn't know how to get back home." Franklin hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her freshly washed hair. "You scared me so much, little one. Promise you won't go out alone again." "I promise." She pulled back to look him in the eyes. "Aren't you mad at me?" "I'm not mad. I was worried." He kissed her on the forehead before turning to Randolph. "Thanks for finding her." Randolph watched the interaction between the two with a complex expression. "She told me that you saved her from a bad woman, and that now she calls you Dad. It's a long story." "I imagine it is." Randolph paused, studying Maisie's face with disturbing intensity. "Franklin, how long have you had her?" "Almost a month. Why?" "Because I know this child." Randolph's words fell like a bomb in the silence of the diner. "Or rather, I know who she is." Franklin felt his blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" Randolph took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the words. "Do you remember Isabel? The housekeeper who worked at our parents' summer house when we were young?" "Vaguely. Why?" "She had blonde hair, smelled of jasmine. She worked for our family for 3 years until—" Randolph swallowed hard. "Until I messed everything up." Franklin felt as if the floor were moving beneath his feet. "Randolph, what did you do?" "I fell in love with her. I was 20 years old, irresponsible. I thought the world belonged to me." The words came out with difficulty. "When we found out she was pregnant, our father fired her immediately. He said I had to choose between her and the family." "And you chose the family," Franklin completed, beginning to understand the magnitude of the revelation that was approaching. "I chose like the coward I always was. Isabel disappeared from town, and I never heard from her again." Randolph looked at Maisie, who was playing distractedly with colored napkins. "Until this morning, when I saw this girl crying in the square, and she told me that her mother was called Luna Santos." "Luna Santos," Franklin repeated, remembering Hope's investigations. Maisie's mother. Luna Santos was Isabel Santos's daughter, my daughter. Randolph's voice broke. "Which means that Maisie is my granddaughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Franklin looked at Maisie playing innocently, trying to process the devastating information. The child he had saved, who had called him Dad, who had transformed his life completely, was his niece, blood of his blood. "How can you be sure?" Franklin asked, still in shock. Randolph pulled a crumpled photograph from his wallet. "I found this old photo yesterday when I came back to town. It's Isabel pregnant shortly before she was fired." Franklin examined the photograph and his heart stopped. Even pregnant and younger, Isabel had unmistakable features that he could clearly see on Maisie's face. The same large, expressive eyes, the same face shape, the same delicate line of her chin. "My God," he murmured, "it's true." "There's more," Randolph continued. "Last night I looked up information about Luna Santos. She spent the last years of her life in the hospital in Albany, battling an aggressive cancer. Before that, she worked as a seamstress and lived alone with Maisie. And the mommy Luna that Maisie always mentions. Probably a neighbor or friend who took care of her when Luna became too sick to do so." Randolph paused, looking directly into his brother's eyes. "Franklin, this child is family, our blood, and I abandoned her twice. First when I abandoned Isabel, then when I never bothered. To find out what had happened to my daughter." Franklin watched Maisie, who was now humming the song she had learned from Mommy Luna. Everything made sense now. The instant connection he had felt with her, the primal need to protect her, the way she had managed to break down all the emotional barriers he had built over decades. "What are we going to do?" Franklin asked. "First, we're going to take care of her together." Randolph extended his hand to his brother, a gesture they hadn't made in 15 years. "Then we're going to try to be the family that Isabel, Luna, and Maisie always deserved to have." Franklin shook his brother's hand, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "She called me Dad in the first week, and she was right. You saved her, Franklin. You gave her what I could never give Luna: a home, security, love." Randolph smiled sadly. "But now she has both of us, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for my mistakes." Maisie looked at the two men, sensing the change in the air. "Daddy Franklin, why are you and Uncle crying?" Franklin wiped his eyes, pulling her onto his lap. "Sometimes we cry when we're very happy, little one. Is Uncle Randolph going to live with us?" Franklin looked at his brother, who nodded. "If you want, yes." "I want to," Maisie said, clapping her hands. "That way I'll have a daddy and an uncle, just like other kids have big families." 6 months later, Franklin's mansion had transformed completely. The garden that had once been an example of ornamental perfection now had a treehouse that Randolph had built for Maisie. The walls of the house echoed with children's laughter, and Evelyn had officially assumed the role of grandmother she had always dreamed of having. Randolph had moved into the west wing of the house and found work as a supervisor at one of Franklin's gas stations. The two brothers had used their influence and resources to expose Carol and rescue the other children she was exploiting, ensuring they were placed in suitable homes. Maisie had flourished under the care of her new family. Her nightmares had decreased drastically, replaced by dreams about birdies flying freely through the blue sky. She had started attending a private school, where she quickly stood out for her intelligence and creativity. On the morning of Maisie's 5th birthday, Franklin found her in the garden, singing the song that Mommy Luna had taught her. But now, the melody sounded different, no longer sad and nostalgic, but full of joy and hope. "Good morning, my princess," he said, sitting on the grass next to her. "Good morning, Daddy." Maisie snuggled against him, watching a group of robins playing in the branches of the maple tree. "You know what I found out?" "What was it?" "The birdies don't just fly when they're sad. They fly because they're free and happy." She looked at him with her big, wise eyes. "Just like me now." Franklin kissed her on the head, feeling a deep peace fill his heart. For 52 years, he had lived as a prisoner of his own emotional barriers. But a lost child had managed to free him, showing him that true love had nothing to do with blood or biology, but with choice, dedication, and the courage to open one's heart. "Daddy Franklin?" "Yes, little one?" "Thank you for saving me." "Thank you for saving me too," he replied, knowing it was the purest truth. As they watched the birds fly freely through the New York sky, Franklin understood that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as daunting responsibilities. Maisie had started as a lost child, whom he had decided to help out of compassion. She had ended up becoming the key that unlocked all the doors of his heart, reunited his family, and gave true meaning to his existence. In the end, they had all found what they had always searched for. Maisie found a family that loved her unconditionally. Franklin discovered that being a father was his true calling. Randolph got a second chance to be the man he should have always been, and even Evelyn fulfilled her dream of being a grandmother. And as Maisie fell asleep that night in her soft bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and protected by 3 people who would give their lives for her, she dreamed of golden birdies flying in circles through the sky, singing a lullaby that spoke about homes found and families chosen by the heart. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.